Imagine for a moment that you're commanding an air defense regiment in some nameless war when the unthinkable happens. A squadron of enemy bombers heads for your location equipped with atomic bombs. Intelligence reports inform you that most of the planes heading your way are decoys, with only a few carrying the nuclear payload. So who do you order your soldiers to shoot down first? You could start with the planes in the front, since they'll be the first to reach your location, but surely the enemy must realize that those planes would be vulnerable and will have placed the bombs further back. Do you shoot down the planes in equal measure across the entire squadron? Or has the enemy anticipated that strategy and grouped the bombs together while you spread your focus elsewhere? The minutes are dwindling and your soldiers are waiting. What are your orders?
Thankfully, this hypothetical was only a simulation conceived during the Cold War, a scenario not unlike the ones played out in thousands of video games across the world each day. But it begs a deadly serious question. Can warfare be conducted rationally? And if so, can it be deterred rationally as well? Or are those questions too dangerous even to ask? This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Nobel Laureate and his groundbreaking work on game theory.
From his earliest years, Robert Aumann was already painfully familiar with conflict and cruelty. Born in Germany in 1930, Robert spent the first 8 years of his life as a Jew, face to face with the increasingly deadly anti-Semitism of the Nazis. Fearing the horrors to come, his parents managed to secure a visa to the United States, but it meant leaving all of their money behind. And in 1938, Robert and his family arrived in New York nearly penniless. Robert began attending Jewish parochial schools in the Lower East Side and in Borough Park, where the family lived. It was in high school where a teacher introduced him to the subject that he would fall in love with, mathematics. And so when it came time to attend college, Robert knew what his focus would be. What he didn't know, however, was how he was going to afford it. It was the tuition-free city college that put that question to rest. With no fees to pay, Robert was able to hold down a job and begin saving money while continuing his studies. City College provided a multidisciplinary education, and Robert took classes in a wide range of fields, including biology, philosophy, literature, music, and film. But Robert's love of math never faltered, and while at City College, he studied under the famous research mathematician Emil Post. Robert was drawn to so-called pure math. These were mathematic disciplines that were seen as entirely intellectual and without practical applications, or, as Robert would later put it, absolutely useless. In 1950, Robert graduated from City College and attended MIT, where he continued his studies into pure math, this time the theory of mathematical knots. But it was also at MIT where Robert first met John Nash, the famous mathematician and subject of the 1998 film A Beautiful Mind. Nash introduced Robert to game theory, the mathematical study of strategic interactions between individuals or groups. As an applied or impure form of mathematics, it held little interest to Robert, and he didn't give it much thought. But after receiving his PhD and beginning postdoctoral work at Princeton, Robert was assigned the atomic squadron problem, that hypothetical war game concerning bombers and decoys. Bell Labs had been developing a surface-to-air missile for the U.S. military and wanted to know what strategies would be most useful in repelling a nuclear strike. Robert realized that game theory could be just the right approach to the problem, and after completing his report, began to take it very seriously. In 1956, Robert and his wife Esther moved to the new nation of Israel, where he began teaching at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The math department at Hebrew University did not look down on applied mathematics the way other schools had at the time, and there, Robert felt free to pursue his newfound interest in game theory. His focus was on repeated games and the theory that a single scenario which does not produce cooperation between parties might produce cooperation in the long run if repeated enough times. In his Nobel lecture, Robert gave the following example. Rowena and Colin are playing a game. Rowena is given two choices. She can either give 10 coins to both herself and Colin, or she can receive 100 coins and give Colin only one. Colin also has two choices. He can either cancel Rowena's transaction, regardless of what it is, or he can allow it. In such a scenario, Rowena has no incentive to share. She knows that Colin won't cancel, since receiving 1 coin will still be better for him than receiving 0. So each person's self-interest results in a big win for Rowena. But if the game is repeated indefinitely, a funny thing happens. Colin can threaten to cancel the next transaction if Rowena only gives him 1 coin. In fact, Colin could keep canceling transactions until Rowena loses more than she would have otherwise gained. In this repeating game, it is in each person's self-interest to always share, a scenario known as strategic equilibrium. This deceptively simple example illustrated a groundbreaking advancement in game theory. His decades-long work on the subject was much more complicated, involving games with different rules, different numbers of players, or incomplete information, and invoking terminology like strong equilibrium, perfect equilibrium, or bargaining sets. But at their most fundamental, Robert had shown that repeated interactions can result in cooperation, even when single interactions do not. Despite starting out as a young math student repelled by applicability, Robert's work in game theory quickly found some very serious and very controversial applications. At the height of the Cold War in the 1960s, Robert and other mathematicians were asked by the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency to work on game theory problems that could help inform negotiations with the Soviet Union. And when Robert and fellow game theorist Thomas Schelling were announced as Nobel Prize winners in 2005, controversy followed even there. A group of nearly 1,000 intellectuals and activists from the US, Israel, and other countries signed a petition opposing the prize. They objected to how Robert and Thomas had used their work, including an interview in which Robert used game theory to criticize the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. It was a rare case of opposition to a Nobel Prize in Science. In response, the Swedish Academy, which awards the prize, stated that it makes its decisions based only on the quality of the scientific contribution, and declined to reverse its decision. War was no mere abstraction for Robert, however. In 1982, his eldest son Shlomo had been killed fighting as a tank gunner in the Lebanon War, a profound loss that brought the issue into painfully sharp focus, both professionally and personally. In his Nobel lecture, entitled War and Peace, Robert argued passionately that war is indeed a rational act, a decision based on measurable incentives and disincentives. He claimed that only by studying those incentives can war be avoided. Any other approach would be doomed to fail. In 2005, Robert Aumann was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for enhancing the understanding of conflict and cooperation through game theory analysis.
Robert Aumann's advancements in game theory were so controversial precisely because they were so consequential. In showing that long-term interactions can be studied mathematically, he suggested a scientific approach to confronting problems as grave and cruel as war. But how can we ethically determine incentives and disincentives when lives are at stake? Robert demonstrated a promising way to approach one of humanity's oldest problems, but in doing so, he also showed that game theory, in the hands of the powerful, is anything but a game.